Hello everyone and welcome back to my YouTube channel. This is Cassie and today I have the Simon Says Stamp October 2019 Thankful Flowers card kit. As of filming it is still available, so I'll have it linked down below along with all the other products that come in the kit separately. So let's go ahead and take a look at what comes inside this kit. They're always chock full of goodies and this one is no exception. You get candy, of course. Then you also get these awesome Tim Holtz Tonic Mini Snips Kraft scissors. So I actually use these for snipping stuff out. They do have a serrated edge and they also have a flat edge, but the serration really doesn't come through when you're snipping things out. And that's compared to the bigger size. You're also going to get the Bold Thanks Wafer Thin Die. You're going to get 3 Simon Says Stamp envelopes in metallic gold, walnut wood grain, and mini cream. You're going to get 12 double-sided sheets of My Mind's Eye Heritage 6x6 paper. And I love these papers because it's a really good mix of masculine and feminine cardstock. I love that you could make both masculine cards and, feminine cards just using that paper pack alone. You're also going to get 2 sheets each of the copper and rose gold Tim Holtz Idea-ology metallic 8x8 Kraft cardstock. So it's metallic on one side and Kraft on the other. And then the gorgeous 6x8 Thankful Flowers stamp set. I love those big bold flowers along with the big bold sentiments, and then you get lots of great little sentiments in here as well. You'll get the package of Pebbles foil foam letter stickers, which I didn't use, but you could use on a lot of cards, an idea sheet, and also some 80-pound Nina Desert Storm cardstock, along with some 100-pound black, dark chocolate, and cream cardstocks. Before we get started with card number 1, let me just apologize for my voice. I am in the midst of a cold, so that's why I sound a little funny. All right, now moving on to card number 1, I've got some Arteza Expert Watercolor paper that I have down on my glass mat, and I've got a couple of mini ink cubes. These are the distress inks, and I'm just squishing those onto a little piece of scrap acetate that I have, and I'm going to smush those. This is a little bit more of a controlled smush. You've seen me smush before if you've been on my channel at all. And this is just a little bit more controlled because I'm trying to get a specific kind of coverage where it still is organic, but it's not completely organic. So I'm still trying to control it a little bit. And in between, I am heat setting each of these. So the colors that I started off with were Broken China and Bundled Sage. That's the green that I have. And I don't want a ton of the Bundled Sage. I do want more of the Broken China, so I'm just spritzing that, kind of moving it around with my fingers, and then, getting that color where I want to be. And occasionally you'll see me pick up my stamp set, and I'm going to hold the flowers over the top because I plan to obviously stamp that down over the top of that. So now that it's all dry, because I was heat setting in between each layer, I have put this inside of my Mini Misty, and I'm going to grab out that big bouquet of flowers. I really do love how pretty these are. They're, they don't look super realistic, but they're bold. I think they're just beautiful. And I'm going to ink up that stamp with the VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink. This is quickly becoming my favorite black pigment ink for, watercolor and just for crispness. And I think it's kind of the same thing as the VersaFine Onyx Black ink. I could be totally wrong, but the difference for me is the lid actually comes off, which is nice. I don't really particularly care for the hinge lid. I did want to bring in a little bit of a black element on the edge of my panel, but I didn't want to bring in any of the black cardstock, so I'm just inking the edges up with that VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink. And I figure that's just enough black. Now I'm going to stamp my sentiment, so I've got a piece of that black cardstock that came in the kit and I've trimmed it down. And I am going over the top of that with my magic powder bag because I plan to do some embossing, and I'm going to ink up my sentiment with some VersaMark ink, which is just a clear sticky ink. And then I'm going to cover that with some Brutus Monroe Alabaster embossing powder. It's beautiful white detail embossing powder. And then I'll heat set that with my heat tool. And don't mind the residue from the powder bag. That will wipe away once everything is dry. I've trimmed my sentiment down and covered the back of it with some foam tape, and now I'm lining it up on my glass mat and sticking that down onto my panel. And then I'm going to use those snips to snip off the excess. And you could feel the serration, but I couldn't see it here, so it didn't bother me. My base is some of the Nina Desert Storm that comes in the kit, and I've trimmed that down to make it a top folding A2 size card, and then I'm just using some liquid glue to adhere my panels to each other. and I cut down some of that pattern paper, and I cut that down to be the size of an A2 size card, so it's going to completely cover my base. And then I'll use a little more liquid glue to adhere that down. And then for a final bit of embellishment, I'm going to grab out the Nuvo drops in the color Bottled Green, because I figured that matched that bundled sage pretty well, and I'll just put a few drops here, a few drops there, and then I'm going to tap those down onto my surface so that they'll kind of flatten out just a little bit, make them look a little bit more like enamel dots. And that's going to finish off card number 1. So it was a really quick and easy card, and I do like the way that it turned out. For card number 2, I'm going to do some Copic coloring and some embossing. And I know that I've said in the past, you know, you shouldn't emboss and then try and color over that. And that's kind of the old way of thinking. I have never tried it. I've never tried actually embossing and then coloring with my Copic markers, because I was afraid that it would ruin the tips. And I'm actually not even going to do that today, because part of the reason is that I am using a different color embossing powder, and my alcohol ink from the markers would color over the top of that, and I don't want that to happen. So I'm not quite there yet. I know the new way of thinking is that it's absolutely totally okay to color over embossed lines, but I'm just not there yet. So what I'm doing is I have these little scraps of Nina cream cardstock that I've stuck inside of my MISTI, and I'm just stamping out that flower using some Barely Beige Simon Says Stamp ink. And I chose a lighter color simply because I am going to emboss over it. So I'm going to leave my stamp exactly where it is. And then when I'm done with all the coloring of each of these flowers, I'm going to bring them back in and re-stamp. So I'll show you that in a second. I'm just going to do some super simple Copic coloring, basically just 2 color blends, and I'm kind of going with rainbow pastel colors. So I've got a pink, a yellow, a green, and a blue, and then I'll go back in and color their centers with a brown, just to make it super easy on myself. And in some cases I don't even shade out very well, because I'm going to let the embossing do the work for me. So I've stuck this back into my MISTI, and then I'm going to ink up those images with VersaMark ink. So that's just the clear sticky ink. And then I'm going to cover that with some embossing powder. This is the Simon Says Stamp Ultrafine Antique Gold. And then I'm going to heat set that till that is smooth and melted. And I'll do that with all 3. So I don't know that you could do this very easily without having some sort of a stamp platform or a repositioner. So this is why the MISTI or something like that would be very handy in a situation like this. And so here we go. I'm just heating all the rest of those till those are smooth and melted, and I really do love the result. And then I'm going to get my elements all ready to go and fussy cut out all of my flowers. So that's just a piece of that pattern paper from the kit. I'm going to use some of the Kraft metallic, and I'm going to run the Thanks die through a couple times through my Sizzix Sidekick, because I am going to layer it. Normally you could probably just use a regular piece of cardstock for your second layer, but I already had that out. So I thought, I'll just go ahead and layer it right over the top of the copper. It's not a big deal to me, because I do end up having plenty of that left over. So I can use that for other projects. And I'm just using my reverse tweezers, which, if you've never used reverse tweezers, those are basically, when you squeeze them, they open, and when you let go, they close. So that's what makes them reverse tweezers, and they're vital to crafting, in my opinion. All right, so now we're going to get ready to assemble the card. I've put down my card panel onto my Nina Desert Storm card base, and now just with some liquid glue, and I'm going to put 2 of those flowers down with some liquid glue along with the thanks that I had cut out. And then I'm going to use some foam tape on the back of the other 2 flowers, and I'll pop those up just for a little bit of added interest, some dimension there. And then as a final bit of embellishment, I'm going to grab the Nuvo caramel cream drops. And yeah, I'm from the Midwest, so I say caramel, not caramel. I know there's a few of you out there that say it that way too, so I'm not alone. And then once I am done with that, I'll tap those down, and that's going to finish off card number 2. And I do finish off the inside after the fact. I finish up pretty much all the inside, so I will show you those after. So here's the inside as well. Card number 3's elements are going to be started off pretty much the same. I'm going to use some of that Nina Cream cardstock that I have. That one didn't come in the kit, but I have Nina Cream cardstock. I'm going to put that inside of my MISTI, and I'm going to grab out all of the flowers from this set and the leaves as well. And then I'm going to ink those up with that same Barely Beige Simon Says Stamp ink. And I didn't clean off my big stamp very well, so you'll see there's definitely some transfer, which is fine. It's not a big deal. It's not going to affect anything. And then I'll start the Copic coloring, and I'm going to basically do it the exact same, but I'm going to keep all of my flowers the light pink color. And I'm just going over just with 2 blends on most of those. So the leaves will get 2 blends, and then the centers don't get 2 blends. Those are just the one brown color, and then the very light, almost orangish pink for all the petals. And then when I'm done with that, I'll stick that right back into my MISTI because I kept my stamps in the exact same spot. I'm going to cover that with my magic powder bag, so that way I don't have any embossing powder sticking to places I don't want it to. And then I am going to ink up my stamps with the VersaMark ink, and then I'll stamp that down and then cover it with the same Simon Says Stamp Ultrafine Antique Gold embossing powder. It was just so pretty that last time that I wanted to see how it would look on that full bouquet, and it's just gorgeous. This stuff is so pretty. And then I'll heat set that with my heat gun just till all that is smooth and melted, and you'll be able to tell because you can hold it up into the light and it'll be shiny. It won't be granulated anymore. I'm going to put that right back into my MISTI and line up my sentiment, which I love these sentiments in this stamp set. You couldn't be more awesome. I mean, that could be used for a lot of different reasons, and I love it. So then I'll ink that up with the VersaMark ink, stamp it down, cover that with that antique gold embossing powder. And then I do have a little bit of embossing powder sticking where I don't want it, so I'll just grab like a stiff brush and rub that away. And then I'll heat set that with my heat tool as well. And it's at this point I'm not 100% sure how I want to do this. So I'm going to pull out the My Favorite Things Stitched Rectangle Stacks die, or it's inside out. I think it's the inside out one. And then I will line that up and then tape it down with just some low-tack tape. In my case, it's washi tape. Run that through my die cutting machine so that I have a little bit of a stitched border around that sentiment. And then I'm going to pull out some of that pattern paper that came in the kit. And then I'll cut that down. I end up trimming it down even further, but I originally trimmed it to 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. And my card base is going to be some of the cream cardstock that came in the kit. And then I'm going to, I had cut it down to 8.5 by 11.5, and then scored it at 5.5. Or no, that's not right. Scored it at 4 1/4. So it's a top folding A2 size card, but it's a more of a landscape one. And I'm taping everything down or gluing everything down with some liquid glue. And it's a shame to have to cover up too much of that the flowers. So I'm just going to cover the back of my sentiment with some foam tape and kind of put that down at the very lower right hand side. I am going to take those leftover flowers and I'll stick those on the inside because I don't want those to go to waste. You could probably make a whole nother card with them, but I thought it would be fun to decorate the inside with them. Just using the same liquid glue. And then I'm also going to stamp out a sentiment, and I'm going to use my Memento Tuxedo Black ink for that. So I can't thank you enough. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And you can never have enough thank yous, in my opinion. And then I'm going to use the Nuvo Dream Drops in the color Love Potion. And I probably use way too many Nuvo drops, but I love Nuvo drops. They're just such an easy embellishment to put on, and they add so much to it. And I'll tap those down. And so that will finish off card number 3. I think that one turned out really, really pretty. Okay, we are really going to shift gears for card number 4. We're going to pull out these Night Shift embossing powders by Brutus Monroe. And I've got a piece of black cardstock that I have trimmed down to 4 inches by 5 1/4. And I'm using my embossing buddy so that I don't have stray embossing powder. I'm stamping that with VersaMark ink, and then I'm covering that with first it's Mulberry Night Shift embossing powder, and then I'm going to heat set that, and it doesn't look like much. It basically just looks like you've stamped almost black on black, but you will see it, you can see it in the light, and it's really pretty. And now I'm going to pull out the green Night Shift embossing powder. And they call it night shift because as you shift it in the light, you can see the different color. You can sort of see it straight on, but you can really see it when you're shifting colors. So I did the same process with that night shift green, and then I'll heat set that. And when you're looking straight on, like I said, you can tell that there is a bit of a difference between the two, but it isn't until you're kind of moving it around in the light that you can really see it. And I'm going to do this all the way down the cardstock, and it actually fits perfectly 5 times. So I'll have 3 of the mulberry and 2 of the green, and I've just kind of offset those just a little bit. And I end up being pretty happy with how that turns out. I just thought this would be an interesting card, and I really wanted to see how it would turn out. So that's how it looks. I'm going to wipe off all that excess magic powder bag, and then I'll hold it up in the light so you can kind of get a look at how that is. It's really neat. So you have that like deep purple and then that dark green, and it looks really pretty on that black cardstock. I do want to add another sentiment, so I'm going to grab a scrap of that Nina cardstock that I had, the Nina cream cardstock, and I'm going to ink that up with some Seedless Preserves Distress Oxide ink, because those work pretty well for stamping. I wouldn't want to use just regular distress inks. Those really aren't formulated for stamping, but the distress oxides work pretty well. And I've trimmed down all my panels, even some of that pattern paper on the background. And I'm going to kind of see how I want to put everything together. So I'll put my black cardstock on top of my pattern paper, just using some liquid glue. And then I do decide that I want to pop up the sentiment that I have that says, I can't thank you enough, thank you, thank you, thank you. So I'll use some foam tape on the back, and I kind of, not really paying attention, I pull all that paper off the back, the backing paper, and then I line it up on my glass mat, and I stick it down, not paying attention to where the sentiment actually is. And then thankfully I hadn't adhered it completely, so otherwise it would have been sticking clear off the edge. So I fix it, and then I flip it over and use the snips to trim off the excess. And then I'll attach this to my cream card base that came in the kit. And then, of course, I finish it off with some more Nuvo drops. It's just way too easy to do. So these are the Sweet Lilac Nuvo drops. I think these were a nice touch. They're a very light purple. Tap those down, and then that'll finish off card number 4. Card number 5 is going to be a pretty easy one. All of my elements are pretty much ready to go. I have a piece of the pattern paper from the card kit, and I'm just sticking that inside my Mini Misty, and I think I cut this down to, gosh, I don't know, a little less than 4 inches by a little bit more than 5 inches. I'm not 100% sure. I just wanted to make sure that I could line the Kraft cardstock, the metallic Kraft cardstock, behind it. So I'm just putting this inside my Mini Misty. I'm going to emboss again. And so I've covered that with my magic powder bag. I have the big stamp, the whole bouquet. I'm inking that up with my VersaMark ink, and then I'm going to stamp that down right onto that pattern paper. And then I'm going to cover that once again with that antique gold embossing powder from Simon Says Stamp, just because it just goes so well with this kit. And then I'm going to heat set that till that is smooth and melted, and it just looks really, really pretty on that background. You could go in and color this if you'd wanted to, like maybe even, you probably couldn't do any watercoloring because it's on pattern paper, but you could very easily color that somehow. But I really liked the more monochromatic look that it had. I'm going to put this inside my makeshift splatter box, and I've got some distress paint in the color Ground Espresso. I'm going to use a little bit of water, and then I'm going to flick that with a stiff brush. I thought it needed some splatters, so I didn't go overboard, but I did put quite a few splatters on there, and then I'm going to set that off to the side to dry. And you're going to laugh, but I took that cardstock that I had cut down, the Kraft cardstock, and I'm going to run that through my die cutting machine with the Thanks die that came in the kit, because no one's going to see that anyway. So I'm going to take that right out of the center, and then I'll be able to use my pattern paper right over the top, and none will be the wiser. So that's just kind of a neat little tip for, using up the paper that you have without having to like cut down another piece, because no one's going to see that. I do decide to cut it out of black cardstock as well, because I'm going to do like a shadow effect with the word thanks. And so, yeah. All right, moving on, we're going to glue this down with just some liquid glue. So I did heat set the distress drops or the distress paint in between because it does take a little bit to dry. So I did heat that with a heat tool. And then I'm just pushing that down because I wasn't 100% sure if those drops were actually dry. My card base is the cardstock that came in the kit. This is that dark chocolate. And it's going to be a top folding A2 size card. But I also did cut down some more of the Nina cream cardstock because that's such a dark cardstock, that chocolate cardstock. So I want to put this on the inside. So I've cut this down to 4.25 by 4 inches by 5.25. I'm going to ink that up with some tea dye Distress Oxide ink. And goodness me, I'm telling you, this bloom could be stamped in any one of those colors, any one of those Distress Oxides, and you can make a bunch of cards out of it, and it's just beautiful. Oh, could you imagine the cards you could make? I mean, that could just be your whole front just stamping in a color like that, or any color. You could go vibrant and then just put thank you on the front of it, and you've got a beautiful thank you card. I've adhered everything down with that liquid glue, and now I'm going to start adhering what I was talking about as far as the shadowed thank you. So I'll use some multimedia matte just because this has a very tiny nib and I want to make sure that this gets adhered very well and quickly. So the multimedia matte does dry a little bit faster than the normal liquid glue that I use. And so I've put that down, then I'm just putting a little bit more on the back of the metallic one. And then I will layer that just right on top, but off to the side. So it just looks like it's, 3D. And that's just kind of a fun way. You can do that with just about any of your dies, really. Any of your word dies, that'd be kind of fun. And once I'm done with that, that's going to finish off this card. I wanted this to be a really simple card. And simple and pretty. So that finishes card number 5. And then I do have, technically a card number 6, but I made 6 of card number 6. Just a super simple using those pattern papers along with the metallic cardstock that came in the kit. You get 6 cards really quickly. So let's take a look at all the cards that I made today. I would love to know if you had a favorite of all the cards that I made today. So if you do, go ahead and list that down in the comment section down below. It's probably my favorite thing about making these cards is finding out which ones you guys like the best. So thank you for liking and subscribing and for all the love you all give me. And as always, guys, thank you so much for stopping by.